criminal acts are as old as humanity itself. They tell tales of anger and hatred, greed and suffering, death and depravity. Nothing affords us a deeper look into the sinister depths of a past epoch than the crimes committed during it. Many criminal cases of the distant past still remain unsolved today. No one had the tools to detect the perpetrators, but what was then impossible can now be done. Today's cutting-edge forensic science offers methods for solving many cold cases of antiquity. High-tech diagnostic and forensic procedures help to solve crimes that for centuries had left people scratching their heads. Arsonists are identified, conspirators convicted, and murderers unmasked. The perpetrators may be long dead, but their crimes live on. In this episode, we'll investigate a treacherous murder in the Alps, a plot at the court of the Macedonian king, and a foiled assassination that made world history. An ancient murder, the site highly unusual, way up on a mountain pass. The Alps. For millennia, people have traversed the passes between Europe's highest peaks. They often underestimated the dangers of the majestic heights. Throughout the ages, people have fallen, frozen, and starved to death here. Tragic, accidental deaths. But the Alps are also the scene of one of the oldest crimes in human history, committed 5,300 years ago. The victim? Ötzi, the Iceman. Shortly after the attack, it began to snow. A white blanket enveloped the body of the dead man. Layer by layer, a tomb of thick ice was erected around Ötzi. When Ötzi's body was discovered more than 5,000 years later, nothing immediately suggested foul play. Ötzi was thought to have been a mountain climber who had fallen to his death. A medical examiner came down from Innsbruck, but he couldn't identify the dead man either because Ötzi was carrying no ID.
It would be great to find a passport or an engraved wedding ring, but that's rare in our line of work. Though it would be a big help. Perhaps future mountaineers should always remember to take such things along to make our work a lot easier.
It was soon discovered that Ötzi had lived more than 5,000 years before the invention of ID cards and passports. He would become the world's most thoroughly examined corpse. Modern forensic science helped to answer many basic questions, giving a clear image of the man. Ötzi died at the age of around 45. He was 1 meter 60 tall and weighed 50 kilos. His shoe size was a European 38, and he had brown hair and eyes. And the Iceman displayed a special feature. He was tattooed from head to toe, 61 tats in all. The South Tyrol Museum of Archaeology. No one knows Ötzi better than mummy researcher Albert Zink. Whenever he has a moment to spare, he checks in on the Iceman.
Ötzi really is a unique mummy, the only one we have from that time period from the Alpine region. All of Ötzi's internal organs were preserved, even his brain. All that makes Ötzi such a unique stroke of luck for science.
To keep the mummy from decomposing, Ötzi's remains are now kept in a cold room with a constant temperature of -6 degrees Celsius. Despite the intensive scientific study Ötzi had been subjected to since his discovery, the cause of death long remained a mystery. Then, 10 years after the find, medical doctors suddenly made a stunning discovery on an X-ray of Ötzi.
An arrowhead was found in Ötzi's body. It was shaped rather like this one here and made of flintstone, typical of the time period. It entered from behind, through his shoulder blade, then penetrated deeper, injuring a large blood vessel that supplies blood to the arm. It was such a severe injury that no one would have survived it for more than about 15 minutes. And he did die shortly after sustaining this arrow wound.
Thus, the cause of death conundrum had been solved. Ötzi had died from an arrow shot to the back. But who was the shooter? And what was his motive? Alexander Horn is head profiler for the German state of Bavaria and was immediately gripped by the Ötzi case. He spent months studying and evaluating all known evidence.
The key to analyzing a crime is always a reconstruction of its precise circumstances. So we first need information about the crime scene, the victim, and the injuries.
The profiler found a first clue to the particulars of the crime on the X-rays of the victim.
On Ötzi's right hand, we found a very deep cut, here in this area. We interpreted that as a defensive injury, sustained in active defense. That is, there was an attack which he fended off. We inferred from the hand injury that it had been inflicted 1 to 2 days earlier. In other words, not in the time frame of the actual fatal incident. So we have a conflict that probably started somewhere else and ultimately ended up there on the glacier with a killing.
After Ötzi had subdued the aggressor in the initial encounter, he presumably first bandaged his hand. But what did he do then? Where did he go? Would it be possible to reconstruct the route?
The question was, what had happened between the first attack with the hand injury and the fatal attack up on the glacier? To find out, we conducted an extensive pollen analysis, enabling us to track his basic movements.
To reconstruct Ötzi's last trek through the mountains, samples were taken from his intestines and sent to a special laboratory. There, a pollen analysis was conducted. This method is based on the fact that with food intake, we also take in pollen, including fine pollen dust. Some of the pollen then goes down the esophagus into the stomach, and then on into the intestinal tract. The key is that different types of pollen are deposited in the intestines according to location and season, creating a chronological record. Pollen inhaled shortly before death will be found at the entrance to the intestines. Pollen taken in hours earlier will be found further down the intestinal tract. So, using intestinal pollen samples, a person's location during the last hours of life can be determined with relative precision. That also applied to Ötzi. For the analysis of his intestinal content, the scientists first dissolved the samples in a liquid and then separated out the pollen with the help of a centrifuge. Finally, the emulsion was processed with an acidic mixture so that only the pure pollen wall remained.
Every pollen has a very specific way it looks, and the way it looks definitely depends on the species, and therefore we can use it as a kind of fingerprint to assign the pollen to a particular region.
Under the microscope, scientists identified pollen traces from at least 30 different plants native to different altitudes that were in Ötzi's intestines at the time of his death. The pollen of one plant was of special interest to the forensic specialists.
In Ötzi's large intestine, the analysis identified mainly the pollen of the hop hornbeam tree, which grows only south of the Alps, not north of them. That clearly shows us that Ötzi had climbed to the site of the find from the southern side of the Alps.
So according to pollen analysis, Ötzi had ascended the Alps from today's South Tyrol, moving northwards. And the analysis produced another interesting result. Ötzi was presumably on the move in May or June, because that's the only time the hop hornbeam tree blooms. Thanks to the pollen analysis, Ötzi's wanderings in the last 33 hours of his life could be precisely reconstructed. He had first ascended to the tree line at an altitude of 2,400 meters, then turned around and descended back down to the valley. At some time during the ascent and descent, he had presumably been assaulted, resulting in his hand injury. After the altercation, Ötzi headed back up, finally reaching the Tissenjoch at 3,200 meters. But why had Ötzi headed up to the pass at all? Was he being stalked?
So the question arose, was he on the run? Had he taken flight in a hurry? The evidence doesn't support that, because what we found was that about 30 minutes before his death, he had eaten quite a heavy meal. If I were fleeing in a hurry because I feared for my life, I wouldn't normally first sit down and enjoy a nice big meal.
The last meal was proof that Ötzi had perceived no immediate threat. The condition of his bow and arrow offered further supporting evidence.
Ötzi was found with a bow, but it wasn't even a finished product. It seems he had just been crafting it, so at that point, he wouldn't even have been able to use his bow and arrow.
Meanwhile, someone was probably already hot on Ötzi's heels. It was almost certainly the man Ötzi had roundly defeated in the skirmish the day before.
And how does the perpetrator feel? I would likely be afraid, feel threatened. That man is dangerous, he can defend himself, and even though he's injured, I'll have to kill him from a distance. So I have a will to kill and the intention of killing.
Because he was afraid of Ötzi, the shooter decided to launch the fatal shot from a safe distance. But would it even have been possible, using an early Stone Age bow, to fire such a precision kill shot at such a long range? That's exactly the question an archaeological experiment would hopefully answer. Archaeologist and bowmaker Jürgen Jonkmans had made replicas of the historic crime weapon, early Stone Age bows and arrows. He joined forces with weapons expert Mike Lodes.
String it up for me. Let me have a feel of this. So, okay. You think that's roughly the sort of dimensions of the bow that was found, Ötzi's bow?
I guess so, yeah.
So, it should be roughly the sort of power that he had.
But would the bow be strong enough to deliver a fatal injury to Ötzi?
I think it comes close.
You think it's close to what he might have had? Can I have a feel of that?
Please.
Yeah, okay, let's have a feel of that. Oh, that's a lovely bow. Oh, I like that bow, Jürgen.
The experts wanted to find out if a long-range precision shot would be possible with a bow from the early Stone Age. The arrows used back then were certainly already deadly precision weapons.
You made this from Stone Age tools. You're a clever man, Jürgen. That is art.
An arrow like this was used to kill Ötzi. But how far away was the aggressor standing when he fired the shot?
So, Jürgen, you're telling me that about 15 meters is your preferred distance if you were hunting an animal. Well, this is 15 meters. Can you hit that?
I hope so.
The shooting test began.
Look at that. Come on, good shot. Look at that. So using archery equipment based on something that was made 5,300 years ago. You've done that. That's pretty impressive. But look how deep it's gone. I mean, just have a quick peek around the back. My goodness, it's really gone through. I mean, this is styrofoam. It's a modern material, but it's got a lot of friction. By any standards, that's a good shot. You must be pleased.
Yeah. Wonderful.
But what if you were up an alpine pass, high in the mountains on a blizzard day with the wind whistling through the ravines? This has big fletchings to stabilize a heavy arrow. It's going to make a difference, isn't it?
Yeah, it will give me a big challenge, I guess.
I can't afford to take you to the Alps, but I do have a wind machine. So I'm going to crank up the wind machine, and you must make your best judgment. Let's give it a go.
All right, let's go.
Way up on the Tissenjoch, the site of Ötzi's murder, a strong wind does often blow.
So to give Jürgen a real problem, I've got this wind machine, which I'm going to push up to full crank. The sort of gusts and winds you might expect in the Alps. Arrows flying straight, but as soon as we hit that gust of wind, you can see how it's rolled the arrow off target. Will Jürgen be good enough to shoot through this wind?
Part 2 of the experiment. The replica early Stone Age bow would be shot under strong side wind conditions.
Wonderful. Let's go look at that. Come on. That's a really good shot, because what we were trying to test there is if the wind would affect your line. And look, you're perfect. Exactly the same line. Now, presumably, that's because of the speed of the arrow. How fast is that arrow traveling?
The speed at which this arrow travels is about 140 kilometers an hour.
So 140 kilometers an hour going through there. This isn't going to make any difference at all.
No.
With that, definitive light had been shed on the Ötzi murder scenario. It was possible, after all, to land a kill shot in Ötzi's back, even at long range, providing the shooter was highly skilled. And what about the motive? The crime analyst had reached a clear verdict.
Ötzi had to die. In modern legal terms, it would be ruled a murder. Why? Because the criterion of malice is fulfilled. The attack came from behind with the victim caught unawares, which is a criterion for murder.
So the world's most famous mummy is also one of the world's most famous murder victims. The scientific evidence now leaves no room for doubt about that. A plot at the royal court of Macedonia sealed the fate of the sovereign. Was the king's own son behind the deadly deed? In early antiquity, Greece was a patchwork of sovereign city-states. To the north, the Kingdom of Macedonia. There, in the year 336 BC, a prince succeeded his father to the throne. The young man would go down in history as Alexander the Great. From the little Macedonian kingdom, he would forge a vast empire. One of the greatest empires humankind has ever seen. Within about 10 years, he conquered all the countries between the Mediterranean and India, including the mighty Persian Empire. Alexander's will to conquer knew no bounds. His campaigns grew increasingly long and drawn out. his troops subjected to ever larger, more intense battles. But it wasn't just Alexander's wars that were bloody. There was blood on his ascent to the throne, too, at least according to rumors during his lifetime. His father, Philip II, had, after all, been assassinated. The death of his father cleared the way to the throne for Alexander. Could he have contracted the killing?
Philip and Alexander seem to have had that textbook, testy father and son relationship. They were both remarkable characters. They were great individuals. They were powerful, they were clever, and it's like two stags who kind of bang up against one another. They seem to have very quickly had issues.
After the assassination, Alexander always carried a dagger. Every night he placed it reverently under his pillow. Was it a safety measure to avoid becoming the next assassination victim? Or was the dagger symbolic of a bloody patricide of his own doing? Another thing Alexander carried with him always? A copy of the Iliad, Homer's famous epic work.
And the Iliad, of course, is the great story of the Trojan War. It's a story of macho aggression, but it's also a story of heroism, being greater than yourself, of being the ultimate male hero.
The young Alexander didn't just dream of the glorious heroes of Greek mythology. He made them his actual role models, especially Achilles, the hero of the Trojan War. Even as a young child, Alexander trained every day, aiming to become a godlike warrior. His mother, Olympias, was convinced that Alexander had been blessed with almost divine powers. The queen had a well-known flair for dramatics. She performed as a dancer at the Dionysian rites. Dionysus was said to have been a son of Zeus, the mightiest god in the Greek pantheon. Olympias contended that Zeus had also chosen her to bear him a godly son, called to do great deeds.
If you're a young boy brought up with this notion that you are special, you're blessed, that you almost have supernatural powers, that is going to give you a real sense of yourself.
The relationship between the king and the crown prince was tense from the start. The overweening influence of the boy's mother didn't improve matters. But the young Alexander asserted himself. He often managed to impress even his strict father. For example, when he broke the wild steed Bucephalus. Legend has it that the high-strung animal could be tamed by no one, except for young Alexander. He managed to gain the horse's trust. Thereafter, Alexander alone was allowed to ride Bucephalus. The black stallion thus became the most famous horse of antiquity. But that did not resolve the conflict with his father. Tensions spiked when King Philip II took another wife.
It's not known exactly how many wives Philip had. Some sources say up to 7. That, of course, leads to intrigues and turf wars, with each woman wanting to secure the future of her own son, preferably by ensuring his succession to the throne.
The mother of Alexander the Great, Philip's wife, is from a place called Epirus. She's not a Macedonian. Cleopatra is a Macedonian. It looks as though perhaps Philip is trying to kind of cement power to establish Macedon as this kind of pure dynastic potentate.
At the wedding of Philip and Cleopatra, Olympias cautioned Alexander that he would lose his stake to the throne should his father sire a son with a new wife. When a toast was raised to the newlyweds, the conflict between son and father escalated.
The historic record tells us that after this scene, Olympias and Alexander fled from Macedonia and went to Epirus. They didn't return to Macedonia until another wedding took place.
Alexander's return aroused expectations. Would the wedding offer an occasion for reconciliation? But that was not to be. The party instead became the scene of a bloody assassination when Pausanias, one of the king's bodyguards, stabbed Philip to death. The perpetrator escaped in the ensuing chaos. But why hadn't the other royal bodyguards managed to stop him? An experiment with modern-day bodyguards would hopefully tell us. 4 of them were charged with the personal protection of one individual. The situation: the individual gets out of a car and enters a public building. From the moment they entered the building, the bodyguards safeguarded their subject, the man in the gray sweatshirt, on all sides. Should an attacker appear, it would be their duty to body block his access to the target. But the bodyguards didn't know that there was an assassin in their midst.
You can never be 100% sure. We still see such attacks today, worldwide, on individuals and property. Of course, we can minimize them with intense background checks before hiring security personnel.
But what happens when background checks fail to root out a covert killer? The protector then becomes a menace, and an assassination can proceed unhindered. Just such a scenario apparently played out 2,000 years ago in the assassination of Philip II. The bodyguard, Pausanias, was barely out the door as Alexander was proclaimed king. When the killer was eventually caught, Alexander had him crucified.
And it seems that Alexander the Great and his mother Olympias were hoping to take over the mantle of power from Philip, and Pausanias becomes the man who physically wields the knife that allows that to happen.
We know all that from reports that historians wrote long after Philip's death. One of them, Plutarch, asserted that the assassin had had a personal motive, because Pausanias is rumored to have had a sexual relationship with the king. In ancient Greece, homoerotic relationships were commonplace and socially acceptable. This brand of sexual libertinage, however, was mainly an upper-class phenomenon.
In Greek society, homosexual relations were pretty much the norm. Men having families and children and also having same-sex relationships was pretty much through and through a part of Greek society.
Could the assassination possibly have been a crime of passion?
The idea that Pausanias had acted alone on a personal motive was never really considered credible.
Whether or not the bodyguard acted on personal grounds will never be known for sure. Rumors that Alexander and Olympias had played a part were already rife soon after the assassination. To quell the hearsay, Alexander ordered the execution of anyone who cast suspicion on him or his mother. Alexander gave his father a customary Macedonian burial befitting his station, but the site of the tomb was a mystery and long eluded archaeologists. Finally, in 1977, a subterranean burial chamber complex was discovered in Vergina. It was so ornate that many were sure it must be the tomb of a powerful ruler. And there was another clue that piqued the archaeologists' curiosity: a golden urn, its cover decorated with a radiant 16-point star, the emblem of the Macedonian monarchs. It was thus initially assumed to be the tomb of Philip II. But the great burial mound of Vergina comprises 4 subterranean tombs. The ornate tomb number 2 lies right in the middle of the complex. It was first thought to be that of Philip II. The other 3 tombs are grouped around it and much less lavish. One of them, tomb number 1, drew the special attention of researchers. Anthropologist Antonis Bartsiokas doubted that the urn from tomb 2 contained the remains of Philip II. The radiocarbon dating of the bone finds simply didn't match the period of the king's lifespan. His theory, Philip II had been laid to rest in tomb number 1.
In tomb 1, there is bones that belong to an adult male, a female, and a newborn. These bones had never been examined before. Although they were discovered in 1977, 1978, many decades have passed and nobody has ever studied them.
The striking thing about the bones from tomb 1 was that the man buried there had died at the age of about 45 and had a remarkable stature.
Measurements from the leg of the fused tibia and femur showed this was a tall man. And it was perhaps the tallest of all the skeletal material we know so far in Greece.
That's a good match for Philip II. The Macedonian king was described as an imposing warrior and was murdered at the age of 45 or 46. So there was much to support the thesis that the dead man from tomb 1 was in fact Philip II. But there was no conclusive evidence as yet. That's what Antonis Bartsiokas and his team hoped to generate with a computer tomography scan of the bone finds from tomb 1. The examination of the left knee revealed a notable deformation.
This is called ankylosis. So it shows that the occupant was lame. This ties with the historical evidence that a lance penetrated the leg of Philip II.
A healthy human knee with an uninhibited range of movement. Unlike the knee of Philip II. 3 years before his death, it had been pierced by a spear or lance. The injury led to significant rigidity of the knee. Thereafter, the king walked with a limp. So the medical diagnosis, too, was a good match for the historical record. There could be only one conclusion. The human remains from tomb 1 were those of Philip II, father of Alexander the Great. But what about the other bones? Who was the young woman and the newborn interred at the side of Philip II? Chroniclers had always asserted that after the assassination of her husband, Alexander's mother Olympias had also murdered his new wife Cleopatra and her newborn baby.
Cleopatra was murdered, as was her newborn child, possibly by Olympias, which suggests to me this is a mother and son combination in the form of Olympias and Alexander, who are prepared to do all kinds of things to solidify their own claim to power.
Whether Alexander was actually privy to the assassination plot is still up for debate. But one thing is indisputable. The murder did clear the way for him. Could Alexander have been plagued for life by a guilty conscience? That would explain the dagger he took with him on every campaign. Did it serve as a constant reminder of his father's end? And then there was the Iliad. Why was he so attached to Homer's epic saga?
We know that Alexander had this, what's called a pothos, a kind of longing for heroism that was also enjoyed by the heroes of the Trojan War. So it's very clear to me that these men like Achilles and Patroclus, were his role models, and he was determined to do good by them and even perhaps to exceed their valor.
Pothos, longing, a key word for the heroes of the Iliad. The study of this epic work was by far the strongest formative influence on Alexander. the young Macedonian crown prince engaged in endless discussions of it with Aristotle, the famous teacher in charge of his education. The dream of conquering the world was alive in Alexander early on. From the start, the boy's mother also nurtured her son's yearning to achieve greatness. Alexander did, in fact, meet and exceed her expectations, creating an empire more vast and powerful than the world has ever known. But this unprecedented imperial domain had perhaps been launched with a bloody crime. A plot was hatched to kill a Chinese ruler, but the assassination went awry, which would mark a turning point in world history. Qiangyang, in the year 221 BC, the capital of a newly minted empire, China. The legendary Great Wall, built by first Emperor Yingchang to protect his vast realm, still bears witness to the advanced and mighty ancient empire. Subsequent rulers extended it even further. At 8,850 kilometers long, it is still the world's largest architectural structure.
The first emperor is not the first person to build a wall. There had been walls before, but he moved them from the walls against the other kingdoms. He moved them to further north, to a wall against the invading barbarians. And that is what later became the Great Wall.
Another gigantic monument, the tomb of the first Chinese emperor. Even in death, 8,000 life-size clay soldiers in full military gear were on hand to protect the ruler for eternity, the legendary terracotta army, honor guard of their commander and emperor, Yingzhang. But all of it might easily have never come to be. Because when his reign began in the year 247 BC, Yingzhang was not yet an emperor. China was beset by ongoing war and chaos. For over 200 years, rival principalities had fought for supremacy in the Middle Kingdom. This would all change when Yingzhang ascended the throne. Within just a few years under his rule, the kingdom of Qin came to hold undisputed power primacy in China.
The kingdom of Qin is considered to be the most boorish of all countries. The people of the other countries look down on the state of Qin. They think these are barbarians. The king of Qin tries to develop his state, the state of Qin, on different levels. On the one hand, it becomes economically the most advanced of all the other kingdoms. And then in military terms, it becomes the most ferocious, invincible, deadly war machine.
The newfound strength of the Qin Empire under Yingzhang threatened the remaining principalities. An emissary was thus sent to meet with Yingzhang. But the diplomatic mission was only a cover story. The man was concealing a weapon. If he could get it past the guards and into the throne room undetected, the king would be a sitting duck.
If they could manage to kill him, then they thought the state of Qin would become disoriented. And when it would become disoriented, then, of course, they would regain the conquered, the occupied regions.
The assassin had brought a map along with him as a gift. Rolled up in it was the murder weapon. A dagger, treated with a deadly poison. A mere scratch from the toxic blade would be enough to kill the king. But at the last moment, something went wrong. Historians, such as court chronicler Sima Qin, first wrote of the assassination attempt about 100 years later. The ancient sources describe a dramatic struggle, said to have erupted between the king and his would-be killer. The training room at a martial arts school in Berlin. Weapons expert Mike Lodes had traveled here to meet with Chinese Shaolin Kung Fu master Shi Yanlin. With his help, Mike Lodes would reenact the assassination scenario in the hope of shedding light on the ancient mystery.
Ni hao, Meister Fu. Hello, nice to meet you. I am at the Shaolin Kung Fu Schule in Berlin, and these experts are going to try to help me solve an ancient mystery. First, we give you a throne. Zetzenbitter, this is your throne. This is your sword. You put your sword in. So let's have a look how that would go. So you're going to come in, present the map, see if you can get the dagger, and let's see how that looks. I'm going to have a look from over here. Okay, so he's looking at the map. It's very interesting to him. He's distracted by the map. Out comes the dagger, but he's quick. He's gone. But with that, he's got the sleeve. Hold it here. Just come back without coming away too long, because this is the critical moment. He's grabbed your sleeve. This is the story from the Chronicles. This is where the sleeve rips. We're not going to rip this sleeve, but you can't get away until this breaks. Okay, so that's what happens now. So we must now imagine his robe has torn. Now he's away. You go after him, but now hold it.
According to reports from antiquity, the attack had failed because the sleeve of the royal silk robe ripped. Pure luck or divine intervention had spared the monarch. But he was not out of danger yet.
And now maybe you now.
The king was armed, but inexperienced in actual combat.
Oh, he's there to get your sword drawn.
Would he be able to wield his very long sword to defend himself against the assassin?
Okay, they come in.
How would the unarmed courtiers in the peripheries react? All of them scholars and medical doctors.
Thank you, love.
For the reconstruction of the final moment, Mike Lodes assumes the role of the assassin.
His sleeve ripped. That enabled him to get away. Now, I'm in a difficult situation. These are not brave men. They will get away from me. Get back, get back, get back. You see, I can get rid of them very easily. Now, we have a situation. He's got a long sword. I'm going to try and get around the pillar. He's around there. Ha, he's there. There's a chase around the pillar, so the story tells us. I'm coming round the pillar again, but the doctor comes with his bag. Now, he has time to cut and cut. And then I am cut to pieces. None of this story would have been possible if his robe didn't rip. It is the ripping of the silk robe that creates this whole scene. How was that possible?
Destiny had saved King Yingzhang for greater things. That was the Angle court chronicler Sima Qin took in his early record of the failed assassination of the future first emperor of China. But how credible are these early depictions of events, which still shape the understanding of the historic incident today?
In general, the historians of antiquity didn't just want to leave a factual record for posterity. They also had a sense of artistic ambition. Everything they produced was actually literature. These were works of art. So they used stylistic devices, such as exaggeration, embellishment, and also omission.
In China, the records of the grand historian, the Shiji, which is our earliest source, are taken quite seriously as historical records. But of course, they have beautiful stories that we might consider legendary or fictional or very dramatic. They are just made for the stage.
What is fact? What is fiction? Was the dramatic account of an assassination foiled by the fortuitous hand of fate, in truth, a propaganda set piece?
So, Monica, thank you for inviting me here to the...
Mike Lodes had come to Aachen in western Germany to test the credibility of the historical record with textiles expert Monika Steffens.
This story that's really puzzling me. The sleeve of his silk gown, probably... Now, he would have been wearing a silk robe, because that's high status. Silk's in by that early period in China.
Yes, it is.
We think of it, you know, as a sewing material. It's a very, very fine thread like that, and that obviously would break quite easily. But once we get it in something like this, then you take that. Okay, now you try and pull me over. It's a strong fabric, isn't it?
It
Go
is.
on, pull me over. Yeah. That's not going to go easy.
No chance.
No, that's not going to go easy. So silk is the strongest of all natural fibers, that when it is woven with a warp and a weft where it's interlaced like that, the fabric becomes incredibly strong, much stronger than any single thread. This is a fairly authentic construction. According to this book from Chinese archaeologists, is a best guess reconstruction, showing how the robe of the period might be made. And what we can see is that there are seams here. Mm-hmm. And this seam could be the weak point. That could be the weak point.
Yes, indeed. This is the weak point.
That's weaker than this. And I bet you've got a machine that can tear some silk for me.
Okay, we'll do it.
Let's go. Okay, let's go.
To put the chronicler's account, the torn sleeve scenario, to the scientific test, samples of the garment that included a bit of the seam first had to be taken. The seam is, of course, formed when separate pieces of fabric are sewn together with thread. Under pressure, these connecting borders are the most vulnerable to damage. Often it is not the type of fabric as such, but the seam that proves to be the Achilles heel of a garment.
So this is your destruction testing machine.
This is the sample prepared with the seam.
This is just a single thread. I can see daylight through there. So that's...
So it's not, the stitch is not very close.
I think I could pull it apart like that. I mean, I think we should, to get the data, we should put it on the machine.
Yes.
But it is really just a single piece of thread holding. A single piece of fine sewing thread.
Yes, yes.
Put it in the machine and let's see. I'm not very confident this will hold up for more than the blink of an eye. Ready to go, Monica?
Here we go.
Here we go. Oh, I can see it. It's going, it's going, it's going, it's going, it's going. It took so much longer than I thought. That is absolutely fascinating. So the seam's much stronger than we thought, but probably not that strong.
It's 250, 25 kilogram.
That's very, very, very surprising.
It took a force of 250 newtons to tear the thread. That's about 25 kilograms. The experts were certain that the perpetrator couldn't have torn the arm off in this manner. But there was another option.
Jinke still had the knife. Maybe he got a slash across the arm. Maybe he might have compromised the integrity of the fabric, just with a light tear. But we all know that once a garment has started to rip, and suddenly, with that rip, the leader of the Qin got away and went on to be one of the most powerful men in history.
So it seems the Shiji record of the incident is only plausible if the sleeve of the silk robe had already torn beforehand. What exactly happened back then remains a mystery. In any event, the tale of the failed assassination attempt was a real propaganda coup for the king. The fateful turning point meme was the ideal launchpad for Ying-Zhang's subsequent trajectory. In fact, the assassination attempt spurred the king of Qin to an unprecedented military offensive. Within 6 years, he had conquered the whole of China, and his imperial initiative didn't stop there.
The first emperor, having decided he would unify everything, he started to unify the currency, the weights, the measurements, and even the width of the axles between the wheels of all carts, so that all carts could travel on all roads. And after unifying all of these things, even the font, the style of writing, so that everybody in the new empire could read all the writings.
Yet the first emperor was an elusive character. The close scrape with assassination had changed him.
He became the mysterious one. He was hiding his whereabouts. He became very secretive. Nobody was allowed to discuss his location. Indeed, you could be punished by death for disclosing where the emperor was.
The emperor also quelled any resistance or opposition with draconian measures. Forced resettlement, slave labor, and mass executions. In spite of everything, Ying-Zhang emerged victorious in the end. After the submission of his adversaries, he called himself the first emperor of Qin. Even after more than 2,000 years, the empire he created still bears his name, China.